Creation is an essence that most would associate with an act of God. To create, in a sense, is to give life. Life in a figurative manner does not have to be given to a literal living organism, of course, like a human or a cat or a dog. In a talkative manner, especially referring to the act of creation, it can be given to almost anything. You know, like the concept of time, or a bunch of geological things like rocks and minerals and gems. However, you either believe in one of two things when it comes to the act of creation as a whole. It's either an act of God, or of course, an act of science. If we delve into the scientific side of things here, there are 7 well-known stages of creation, starting with the Great Radiance, swiftly moving on to chemical evolution, and then celestial evolution, and then biological evolution, and cooperative evolution, and cultural evolution, and finally, enlightened evolution. We as people evolve. We go through everyday tasks, evolving through these tasks, learning and changing. As much as someone would like to avoid it, talk down on it, or even straight up choose to not believe in it, we are and always will be forced to evolve. It's through both evolution and change that we begin to develop such a huge string of different things. We gain new knowledge to things we may not have known about before. Of course, we learn to toughen up and make it through our respective evolutionary processes. And we of course can learn new perspectives on moralities, what it means to truly put an effort, to show true kindness or anger or sadness. Basic human morals are something that I hope all of you watching this video have a good grasp on. However, in terms of how these themes and messages are portrayed in the medium of anime and manga, Haruko Ichikawa's Houseki no Kuni, or Land of the Lustrous as it's known as in English, does a perfectly good job of it. In one of her many interviews, Haruko Ichikawa had stated that the idea for the series' plot had formed way back in high school, or well, what she thought was a regular high school. See, weirdly enough, without knowing it, Haruko Ichikawa actually enrolled into a school that centered around the teachings of Buddhism. She stated that even in regard to lessons, in a normal high school, I'd imagine you'd study ethics, but here we studied about Shinran as a part of Buddhism for 3 years. During these lessons through Buddhist scripture, I learned of the longer Sukhativyaha Sutra, and one line states, "The Western Paradise is made up of gems." This Western Paradise of gems is what interested Ichikawa so much, and through this, it gave her the idea for the story as a whole. But we'll get into why and how that integrates into the series' themes later. The story starts with introducing us to our main protagonist of the story, Phosphophyllite. For the sake of simplicity, I'll just be referring to them as Phos, just as the story does. Phos's rather innocent, newbie sense of nature is the first thing that's put on show for us to see. Even in the very first episode or chapter alone, we see Phos fix their hair while viewing the reflection on the water. Obviously, this sweet and innocent character would want to look nice and cute for their big meeting, but as Phos fixes their hair, we see a rather oddly emphasised ripple in the water. And I personally think this is rather poetic, almost symbolic to a certain degree, to see this in the very early stage of the story. Seeing as Phos goes through a radical amount of change both internally and externally, this ripple could go as far as to symbolise the shattering of Phos as a character, their sanity and their inner rules and outlook on things warping and rippling. However, to explore how Phos goes from such a sweet, kind-hearted character to a broken, hungry, black and white outlooking bedlamite, we must take a deeper look into the slow spiralling change of their character, the other gems and the world around them. Humanity is a complicated thing to grasp, I'll say that much. It's interesting because we as humans can't really fully grasp nor explain what the meaning of humanity is. It's a fickle conversation that usually nobody can really come to an ultimate conclusion on, because whether you personally choose to derive your own narrative for the meaning of life itself or not, you'll most probably always be plagued with doubt at the end of the conversation or the thought process of said topic. Like, what is our purpose? And when it comes to highlighting this, in the beginner halves of the story, Houseki no Kuni's Phosphophyllite projects these themes and queries of her own almost pitch perfectly through the writing of their character image. In the beginning, Phos is a character that doesn't really know how to fit in. They are of course quite young compared to the other gems, Phos dating at a rather jarring 300 years old. However, that's nothing compared to their later partner Cairngorm, for example coming in at an age of 1102 years old, around that age. Being at this age, Phos still struggles to find themselves amongst the other gems. They're desperate to try and almost do anything to simply fit in. Their mindset is just simply one-tracked, convincing themselves that the only way to progress is to camouflage amongst their peers. To move forward is to adapt to their surroundings. However, it's through this that we learn that Phos is somewhat presented to us as the somewhat underdog of the group. Their sensei, Adamant, also referred to in the series as Master Congo, reveals to us that Phos seems to be a lot weaker compared to the other gems. Phos being very delicate, their solidity is very low, they shatter very easily. Phos's hair colour can also be found to attract Lunarians, seeing as it's their favourite colour. Phos also being described as rather clumsy, ditzy, not being able to focus hard enough in order to complete regular tasks that other gems are able to proceed with on a regular basis. However, despite all these themes and flaws, Phos is still able to be made of good use. Their job made to be somewhat of an explorative, scholarly one of creating an encyclopedia. It's through this that Phos is forced into a situation that they are forced to evolve. While not quite literally gaining strength in order to adapt, Phos is put in a situation where learning and gaining new knowledge is very beneficial to their character. Learning and changing, which can eventually lead to a more metaphorical sense of strength. Of course, there is a rather cliche meaning here of words are stronger than fists, and to Phos, that quite literally does start to seep in for a while. But their undying interest to join others on the battlefield is one that never really fades. So as time passes, this seems to present nothing but problem after problem for Phos, and unfortunately, their immediate response to these problems is to force themselves to change. Of course, going back to what I mentioned at the very start of the video, change is something that we all have to be subjected to down the line of life, and through change we evolve. However, what I didn't specify is that sometimes change isn't always that beneficial. Of course, however, that should go without saying. The naturality of change is one that I'm sure all of you watching this video can definitely grasp rather well. We all have to be forced into these positions whether we want to accept it or not, whether we want to put ourselves into the position to adapt or not. Phos and their character is simply to highlight the aspect of getting on with it, but Phos and their eagerness to be a part of something greater is what adds a rather uncomfortable aspect to the themes being showcased in the narrative. Phos's constant drive to live up to something, live up to a standard that they don't even know if they'll be happy with in the end, is one that is definitely able to make the reader feel very uncomfortable. Even as I was reading through the series, specifically in the latter half, I felt a rather constantly concurrent feeling of anxiety experiencing and seeing every choice Phos made for themselves, especially after the winter arc. When asked, how do you depict such themes of anxiety, Ichikawa responds with, I'd say even having the horizon tilted slightly makes me anxious. When depicting this anxiety, it's not something specific with the tones presented, but rather, I guess, just a feeling. I'd be happy if my manga would not just relay information, but also exude a certain feeling. In this sense, there must be a meaning to the fact that manga as a medium uses both story and picture for purpose of expression. As the story moves on and focuses on Phos dealing with the loss of Antarcticite, we see them quite literally change. With their arms and legs being replaced after the event, it bears a great deal of pain, not only on Phosphophyllite, but on the reader as well. I think as I made it through the story, I couldn't help but feel extremely attached to Phos. The character gave off a very likeable, innocent charm that slapped the reader or watcher directly in the face. It made you genuinely care for the progression of Phos, and it had you worried with every big step they were going to make, almost like you felt the need to take on a nurturing role for the character that of course was unfortunately impossible. The story just has this very unnerving theme of forcing you into situations that you feel like you aren't ready to fully take in yet, as a reader or a watcher. Of course, I know this may come off as me saying the pacing of the series is bad, and that's definitely not what I'm trying to get at here. What I am trying to say, no matter how bad things get for Phos, or Adamant, or the Lunarians, or the rest of the gems, or Earth as a whole, there is no point of rationalization. No point for the characters to just pause and ask themselves, why are we doing this? What will we do next? And why are these things happening to me? They're just forced to accept these things and see them as nature running its course. And it's as we see this position of just accepting things flourish through the cast, Phos specifically in the earlier halves of the story, it's here that we can fully see how it's just unfortunately to deal with the form of adapting to overcome, to better suit ourselves to the radical sense of rapid change. No matter how well you can adapt to something, or no matter how poorly you can adapt to something, sudden change can always have the ability to leave you feeling uneasy when it's coming at you at full force. Phosphophyllite as a character is one that I personally love because they're written to not only portray the themes of adaptiveness and lust, which can eventually transform into a notion of greed, but to portray the themes of insecurity and uncertainty, as we somewhat mentioned earlier. Phos as a character from the very early stages of the story has been plagued with the feeling of insecurity and self-doubt, but as we take a step back and look at these insecurities as the series unfolds, it's a highlighted structure that does nothing but evolve. Everything the series throws at them simply just seems to bring them less and less pride throughout, whether it be the first chapter or episode where we see Phos literally get showcased as nothing but a delicate burden, whether it be through the latter stages of the winter arc as we see them lose Antarcticite to the Lunarian invaders, the acquiring of new arms and legs that seem to slowly eat away at their memories, or ever-growing knowledge of Master Adamant's connection to the Lunarian race. Phosphophyllite's journey throughout the series is told perfectly through the themes of insecurity, as well as trying to deal with change, that rather obvious insecurity deriving from the meaning of change. Constantly feeling one step behind, or constantly feeling out of the loop of what is really going on. It seems to leave them feeling rather alienated when it comes to not only their time on Earth, but amongst the gems and Adamant too. Taking the literal expression of feeling alienated to a whole nother level that is visually represented and written into the story, with Phos leaving to try and gain knowledge from the Lunarians instead. I mentioned a little earlier how Phos tries to deal with the acquisition of new arms and legs. Of course, on surface value, it's shown to mess with their inner self a lot. Phos becoming so damaged to the point where their head must be replaced with another gem, the head in question belonging to Lapis Lazuli. The more Phos loses of themselves, the less they can truly hold on to the memories of past time they spent as well as Phosphophyllite. There's a very well put together comparison that runs through the course of the Houseki no Kuni audience that I'd like to bring to light, as I feel like it perfectly explains what goes on with not only the gem's parts being replaced with another, but adds a certain uncomfortable flair to a lot of the day-to-day things we tend to look at. The query known as the Theseus paradox. The Theseus paradox, also known as the experiment of Theseus' ship, is a thought experiment that raises the question of whether or not an object that has had all of its components replaced remains fundamentally as the same object. The paradox is most notably recorded by Plutarch in the Life of Theseus from the late 1st century. Now, if we take this and apply it to Phos, things start to become rather unnerving, to say the least. As more and more of Phos gets replaced, the more of the character we knew and loved slowly begins to rot out and die. True intentions begin to be shown, new memories from gems that contribute to the making of their body start to appear, and the attitude that Phos is shown to have in the earlier stages of the series can be completely disregarded and warped to become a lot more poisoned and cynical. The question we're left with after these changes in the character are put on in focus is Phos still Phos? Does the loss of their memories or acquiring of new ones fundamentally change Phosphophyllite as a person? This question, well, it is a rather blatant one in my opinion, is not much of a fun one to answer. Much like how the family members of a loved one with such things as Alzheimer's, dementia, or even schizophrenia or a radical bipolar disorder tend to think of these things or ask such questions, it's left up to the initial inquirer to ultimately decide whether or not they want to believe. It's with this that the reader is left for themselves to decide if they truly want to believe that the gem we're seeing before us in these moments of the story is indeed our Phosphophyllite. It's a concept that no matter how much we debate with others, there will be no definite conclusion. It just puts things into perspective that really makes us wonder what makes us, us. Our previous talks of Phosphophyllite feeling alienated amongst the other gems and Adamant himself can now be fully explored, all wrapping around the themes of humanity and questioning the meaning of such. With Phos slowly becoming more and more detached from their original self, we slowly start to see their outlook on true morals and the meaning of humanity as a whole start to wrap up. We see them get entangled in the radical sense of doubt that, well, they're a puppet. The meaning of fitting in, being a part of something, isn't just about wanting to get the desired role or not, but becoming the task of being a whole new person, a whole new being entirely. It's shown that from the very beginning, everyone was doing their part to evolve Phosphophyllite into something greater, a human being in its purest, freshest form. Man is not a fallen creature who begs for his needs as he awaits mercy. Man is a potential master of himself. Only because of his deep ignorance does man fail to realise his full potential. Since Buddha has shown his hidden power, man must cultivate his mind and try to develop it by realising its innate ability. Understanding humanity and getting a grasp of what makes us, well, us, is a message that Haruko Ichikawa perfectly captures within the narrative. Of course, for a large majority of the story, it's left up to the reader's interpretation whether or not these themes are prominent. But as we've reached the latter half, this message of what is humanity can now be highlighted for the audience as a whole. And that is mostly why I write manga, she says. What is it that makes us human? Even if not completely, I want to get a hold on this secret. Human nature, what it means to be human, and what makes the true moral progression of humanity seem natural, is what is finally brought to the table as we gain the knowledge of Phos being trained to become the pitch-perfect image of a human. However, it's this obsession with achieving almost the unachievable that eats away at them slowly and painfully. I mustn't think about anything, Phos tells themselves, serving it as their own reminder that nothing good has truly come from thought. The fear of thought is one that comes naturally to us humans depending on the scenario. Whether we're flung into a situation that makes us feel uncomfortable, a situation that adds a lot of pressure on our mindset, anything resembling those moments, really. They make us fear the act of thought. To overthink something can cause an immense amount of dread and uncomfort, leaving our anxiety-ridden selves in that moment to panic, to wonder just what we'll do next. It's in Phos's eyes that they must throw away these instincts to truly evolve beyond what they're capable of. Seeing the line of thought as a form of weakness, however, the more and more they strive to become more human-like, it's with these moments, like Phos giving up on the act of thought for example, as the more we see the character actually throw away their humanity, deeming basic human instincts like what we've just mentioned as a sign of nothing more than an inconvenience on their actions. The drive to completely become perfect, not to show weakness or to experience distraction or fear or guilt. However, the question that lies with this is that, well, this isn't what perfection is. This isn't what perfection is at all, actually. In the eyes of many, perfection can truly be perceived as the greatest imperfection of all. To be perfect to oneself is to add limitations, not to only throw away natural bodily and mental instincts that truly make up what it means to be human, certain flaws in certain aspects, but you're also bringing yourself to a dead end. When you achieve this so-called perfection, there's nothing left for you to achieve. For one to be perfect, one must completely come to a halt. There will be nothing to learn, nothing to gain. The feeling of progression, change, scarring and healing and losing and gaining will all be completely null and void in this perfect life we speak of. Perfection ultimately wraps around to nothingness. However, to portray the odd form of defying perfection through the series, the interesting location setting of the story somewhat poetically complements such messages. Like I mentioned to you at the beginning, Ichikawa's studies of the Western Paradise of Gems, or as it's more widely known as, the Western Pure Land, the Amitabha Sutra describes the Western Pure Land as a beautiful place surrounded by trees made of jewels and ponds filled with gemstones and wondrous coloured light emitting lotuses, buildings made of precious stones, celestial music constantly playing and gorgeous flowers descending from the sky, tawny gold-covered grounds and birds communicating the Buddha's teachings in their melodious songs. One quick thing to mention here, the celestial music part, more than complimented by Yoshiaka Fujisawa's soundtrack for the anime. As we slowly begin to find out the secrets of Adamant, we learn that he is actually a machine built for praying by the remaining humans that previously inhabited the land. The act of praying to purify the passing souls. However, as Adamant, who he learns name is actually Kongo, continued to pray, his internal components began to malfunction, causing his prayers to lose the effect. Thus, the passing of souls of humans going unpurified, which led to the ultimate creation of the Lunarians. It was Kongo's goal to create a perfect paradise for the gems to live. They would inhabit the land after his passing, work and rebuild as their own little society. Obviously, we can draw comparisons here to the Western Pure Land and Haruko Ichikawa's previous teachings of Buddhism in her high school life. However, this perfect land was never able to be completed due to the mass amount of conflict between the gems and the Lunarians. I think we can actually draw some rather striking resemblances to our own reality while viewing such a topic in Houseki no Kuni. I briefly talked about this in my previous video on Attack on Titan, but as we strive towards the false idea of perfection in our rather broken society, Houseki no Kuni, or Land of the Lustrous, does a perfect job of mimicking our real world issues through a fantasy setting, highlighting that through constant conflict and war, we will never be able to fully move on and progress to something better. As we reach our final act in the story, the projections of change, evolution, basic morality, and the hunt for perfection can finally be showcased through both Phosphophyllite and the world that Ichikawa has set up in the series. To me, Phos as a character is one that I really felt upset and hurt by with every action they decided to make after a certain peak in the story. At its very basic core, Houseki no Kuni, or Land of the Lustrous, is a story about growth and how to deal with said growth. Through the story of Phosphophyllite, we see the true exaggerated weight of how it feels to feel lost as we grow. The traumatic and harmful scenarios that Phos gets put through and flings themselves into may seem radical and emotionally jarring at first, but these scenes and situations for me are what purely encapsulates how it feels to be locked away in the mindset of dealing with sudden events. Change is natural. Progression is natural. Evolution is a guarantee, and perfection is perceived to be a cynical idea to lust over. In the end, all these sudden events are indeed normal, yet as we assure ourselves of this and we make sure to tell ourselves that everything is going to be okay, can we truly justify the strive for normality as even being normal either? Phos's rather cute drive to fit in and just be like them is one that turns rather sour and gets perceived to be rather ugly as we push through the story as well. Their character goes from viewing normality as simply just trying to fit in to then becoming obsessed with the idea of being above those who deem themselves to be normal. However, in the end, who are we to deem what is normal and what isn't? Phos, while being able to obviously make their choices and decisions, still very much resembles that of someone in early adolescence. Like our younger selves, the journey of figuring out what is right from wrong and self-discovery as a whole is one that the character of Phosphophyllite shows the audience rather well in nature and tone. Whether these journeys of self-discovery plagued you in the early years of your life, or whether you may be watching this video with those worries, for example what the future holds for you, or maybe what's in store tomorrow, or the day after that, or the day after that, the story of Houseki no Kuni puts an amazing highlight of those worries on display for the reader or watcher, to make you realise that ultimately you aren't alone in these struggles and you never have been. Phos's views on normality are somewhat affected by the position of adolescence that we see them as in a character. When we were all young, we looked up to those older than us as something to strive towards. That is what could be deemed as basic normality at a young age. To grow, age, and eventually feel like you have a certain power and authority. With their views and the fact they've remained so closeted in knowledge, Phos essentially took the concept of that and began to run with it as the series progressed. In their eyes, to be normal is to be a symbol of authority. However, as we take a step back and take a look at these basic human morals that we follow, we can obviously come to an understanding that with age, we need to project ourselves as a symbol to those under us, not as a showcase of power over the group that we see under us. The coming of age aspect of Land of the Lustrous is one that is perfectly executed through the writing of Haruko Ichikawa, and it's showcased as a form of not only trying to fit in, but as a form of looking to be recognised in a sense. As Ichikawa stated, most people I know are always complaining about their job, but they still do it properly anyway. Not for just the sake of money, but I feel like there's also a sense of wanting to be recognised, a desire to be approved. I'm writing this manga as I have a strong feeling to find out whether or not this is true. This right here is somewhat of an interesting statement, because if we apply it to Phos and their constant corrupting of what being human truly means, things start to clear up and make a little more sense on surface level basis. Since the beginning, Like I've brought up plenty of times, all Phos seems to be trying to do is fitting in. They work as hard as they can to, well, find work to work hard at. Through this work, through this role that they're assigned, all up until the self-assigning missions for certain things, Phos's journey of discovery was purely made through the jobs they were tasked with. Their idea of fitting in and blending in and finding purpose was purely through the concept of work. Feeling like you're lost, especially in a position of being at your full development as a person, one of your first instincts is to find work. To work for something. For someone to strive to work towards something. Through the act of work or school or any task, say even hobbies or chores, it's these day-to-day tasks that some of us see as troublesome at times, unconsciously trying to find out who we really are as a person or as people. Whether they're working with others or whether we're isolated or maybe even just simply letting the road take us to our own duties, work at its very nature is something that molds us as a person as we grow and accept to see how society truly operates. It helps us learn, adapt, overcome obstacles and change, usually for the better. We learn to respect others, to work hard, to toughen up as people and to overall develop and create an overarching goal in life through the working environment or experience. Without us even knowing it, we learn this every day. Houseki no Kuni puts a wonderful highlight on this. Even with Phos's job they're originally assigned with, creating the encyclopedia, it's a line of work that requires a vast amount of learning and finding out new things along the way, much like a mirror to that of actual working or transitioning period in the real world. Through work we find meaning. Through education we find meaning. Through being a part of something and learning and hating and loving, we find meaning. A theme that Haruko Ichikawa tries her very best to not only portray in the story of Houseki no Kuni, but also uses the series as her own way of learning these themes. As she weaves these overarching lessons into the story, she herself is trying to learn what truly makes these principles so important. I always thought that what made someone rightfully human was nothing but their ability to work. Without working, without feeling you're being some use to society, it's hard to find meaning in life. End quote. The rather poetic quotes here from the author herself show us just what the intention of her story actually is. In the end, the series itself is designed to help one learn. Whether it be through the themes that she writes that she is completely clueless on, the ones that she learned as she grew up as a person, or the life lessons that she wants to project onto a younger group to help them learn the trials and tribulations of life and development and coming of age. Haruko Ichikawa's Houseki no Kuni or Land of the Lustrous is designed to help you recognise and feel that yes, everything is okay. The natural progression that you feel both inside and out is nothing to fear. These fears and anxieties you may have moving on, or having lack a purpose or feeling left out, much like how Phosphophyllite felt in the earlier halves of the story. These feelings are natural. You shouldn't have to feel alienated because you may feel like you're slipping between the cracks or that you're falling behind amongst your peers. It's about getting back up and proving to yourself that these trials are nothing but life running its course. We can very much just lay down and admit defeat, yes, but why settle for that? The world is full of knowledge and experiences just waiting to be explored and touched up upon by you, the viewer of this video. So, if there's one piece of advice I can give you here and now, much like how the story of Houseki no Kuni projects, is that yes, depending on the circumstances, it's okay to embrace change. Whether you fear it, cherish it, encourage it, whatever. Just make sure to remind yourself that how you feel is okay. Perfection is nothing but a barrier, so don't strive to be perfect. Strive to look beyond what's behind the door of perfection. Who says that you just have to outright stop? What are you going to do once you get there? Just feel empty and lost? Because you shouldn't. Why be the image of perfection when you can be something more? Houseki no Kuni is a story that I had no idea I would end up getting so emotionally attached to as I began my journey with the series. The messages that I delivered to you here are some that I really need to sit down and think about and actually follow myself, but I am working on that, so that's okay. It's always so much of a treat to see such a small series pop up and highlight themes that seem way too big for its boots initially. However, the beyond amazing writing and beautifully hypnotic art of Haruko Ichikawa is made to suck you in and just care. When it comes to Phosphophyllite, I never expected to feel such a genuine need to jump through the pages of this manga and care for them and help them out. I almost felt helpless in a sense, seeing this bright, cute, ambitious character divulge into something broken and torn as a person. It's heartbreaking to say the very least. However, this is a story that I cannot stress enough that everyone gives at least a chance. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell the fucking world if you want to. And always remember to go beyond.